Thank everybody for coming out tonight. My name is Jeff Rogers. I'm a professor of history here at Gordon State College, and it's my honor and privilege to be the chair of the FDR Lecture Series. This is our 12th annual event, and we are really excited to have Haven Roosevelt Luke back with us. He gave such a fantastic talk last year. We had to have him back for a repeat performance. Gordon State College has a special connection to Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the Roosevelt Legacy. He, of course, visited this campus and gave a critically important speech beginning the REA, which began the process of electrifying rural America, transforming the lives of countless millions of Americans at the time, and of course making tremendous contributions to developing rural America. And I'm going to show you a short clip that helps to illustrate further that legacy, that connection to our college, and what the significance of that is.
Always love coming to this space. This is such a beautiful spot. I love the people here. My visits have been so good for my body and my spirit. I have time to think about the future of our country and our world. I can reflect on my life, and I am inspired by the people of this region. I intend to keep coming back. There was only one discordant note in that first stay of mine at Warm Springs. When the first of the month bill came for electric lights in my little cottage, I found that the charge was about 4 times as much as I was paying in another community, Hyde Park, New York. And so, my friends, it can be said with a good deal of truth that a little cottage in Warm Springs, Georgia, was the birthplace of the Rural Electrification Administration. Yes, electricity is a modern necessity, not a luxury.
The impact of President Roosevelt coming to this area was something that even President Jimmy Carter called it more important than the day he married Rosalind Carter, and more important than the day he became President of the United States. We're talking about a time where people, in anticipation of having electricity in their house, actually wired their homes in anticipation. We're talking about people like local farmers and Senator Richard Russell, who happened to be a graduate of Gordon, asked the president to come down and visit and induct, if you want to call it, the Lamar REA. It was symbolic that he would now push the button that would provide electricity to over 50,000 people in this area. Prior to then, people would have to read by candlelight or kerosene. But now this was a life-changing opportunity for people to have electricity that was already available in towns and cities, but not in the rural part of America. So this was a game changer.
And also I think it's important, because I grew up in South Georgia, rural South Georgia, that Roosevelt created the Rural Electrification Program. And that brought electrification to people in rural areas that they didn't have it before. I had relatives who lived on farms in my day who didn't have electricity. They didn't have lighting, they didn't have heat, they didn't have telephone. And so the electrification program changed their lives dramatically for the better. So as Roosevelt was coming to closure, he wanted to say this was not just about trying to fix the problem today, but it was about progress. It was about progress.
A few years ago, I was a student here at Gordon State College, one of the premier colleges here in the state of Georgia, a college that has a history of creating smart and excellent leaders for our country. While in my dorm room, I was studying for a history class, and I wondered to myself, hey, is there anything historic on my campus? and ended up Googling, finding out that President Roosevelt spoke here. And he spoke on August 11th, 1938, just a few yards from my dorm room. After reading his speech, I was inspired. I was inspired about how it talked about helping your fellow citizens become better by bringing electricity to the South and helping Southerners get to the same level as their counterparts in the North. It made me want to make sure that other people understood that we all have a duty to help our fellow citizens out.
Daddles Knob occupies a special place in the story of FDR in Georgia. This spur on Pine Mountain in Harris County looks out over a vista largely unchanged since FDR last saw it many decades ago. FDR, through the New Deal, crafted 20th century solutions to the crises of his era. In doing so, he developed a framework for addressing the challenges of the 21st century as well. The Knob provided our 32nd president with a place to connect with the world and its wonders. This outdoor cathedral inspired and energized him, helping him create solutions for the many problems facing our country in the 1930s and 1940s. Drawing inspiration from both nature and his neighbors, FDR crafted public programs to improve the lives of American citizens impacted by the Great Depression. Drawing inspiration from Daddles Knob, FDR encouraged his fellow citizens to preserve and improve natural resources in farming, forestry, and public lands. Through the New Deal, the Civilian Conservation Corps planted over 1 billion trees, corrected agricultural practices that produced the Dust Bowl, and significantly expanded and improved our national and state parks. Georgia's largest park, FDR State Park, encompassing 9,000 acres, was greatly enhanced by the New Deal's efforts here. The Little White House, today the most visited historic site in the Georgia State Park system. Invigorated by the soothing waters of Warm Springs, FDR imagined a world free from the polio virus, the pandemic that impacted him and millions of others worldwide. 2 agencies he helped create achieved this goal. The Roosevelt Warm Springs Institute provided physical therapy to polio patients, while the March of Dimes provided financial support, enabling scientists to develop the vaccine that would eradicate polio from all but 2 countries in the world. The first global public health campaign originated in Warm Springs, Georgia. Today, the Roosevelt Rehabilitation Center continues the work of therapeutic rehabilitation of stroke and accident victims, in addition to providing vocational rehabilitation to those with physical or mental disabilities. The March of Dimes continues its work, focusing on issues related to mother, infant, and child care. Drawing from his experiences in rural Georgia, FDR envisioned a nation where rural Americans would be afforded the benefits of electricity through another New Deal program, the Rural Electric Administration. Today's electric membership cooperatives created by the REA are a national network of 900 member-owned co-ops covering 88% of America's landmass and providing electricity to 42 million people. The challenge of providing internet access to rural America is a task today's EMCs are now seeking to address. Living in rural Georgia, FDR saw firsthand the poor housing conditions of many of his neighbors. As part of the New Deal, FDR advocated for public housing in both rural and urban areas. Techwood and University Homes in Atlanta, as well as the Pine Mountain Valley community below Daddles Knob, were among the first projects the federal government created to meet the housing needs of low-income people throughout America. FDR as president addressed these and so many other challenges facing ordinary Americans with solutions drawn in part from the insights gained while living in West Central Georgia. On January 31st, 1946, the Georgia General Assembly created the FDR Warm Springs Memorial Commission to preserve FDR's legacy in Georgia. Through this legislative act, the General Assembly uniquely honored our 32nd president and neighbor.
All right, the voice you hear at the end is the voice of this man right here, who is Dan White, who is the wouldn't be a series without him, and I want us to please join me in welcoming him. Thank you.
Well, a wonderful turnout for a wonderful speaker. I have gotten to know Haven over the last couple of years through our service together on the Warm Springs Advisory Committee, which, as was just mentioned, was created by the General Assembly in 1946 to preserve the legacy of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in Georgia, which is an amazing story. FDR was here for over 20 years, on and off. Came to Georgia to, as he said, feel normal. And while he came for the waters, he stayed for the people. Because while he never walked again, he was psychologically made whole by his experience here. And many of you are, from this region, and it's a very, very impressive legacy that you share with our 32nd president, because it was your ancestors, great-grandparents who helped FDR recover that sense of optimism and ability to move forward under very, very difficult conditions, personally and obviously in the larger environment. So this is your story. This is your family's story as much as it is Haven's family story. So we serve, as I said, on the advisory committee together. It's been a wonderful experience getting to know him, and he is the first member of the Roosevelt family to serve on the advisory committee. So with that, I'd like to introduce Haven Luke, FDR's great-great-grandson, as our speaker.
Thanks very much, Dan. It is also my great privilege to be on that commission with Dan and a number of other just terrific people, all of whom care about FDR's legacy here in the South. I sort of feel like my thunder's been stolen. The film that you saw, the clip, it's from a wonderful film that Dan made, and it captures the essence of FDR's love of Warm Springs and the South in general. And so it was much better said in that film than you're going to hear from me, so my apologies. I'm not a historian. There are many people sitting in this room who are better qualified to talk about the legacy of the New Deal than I am. So with that being said, please forgive my lack of expertise, but I will give you what I've got. So the subject of the talk is the legacy of FDR and the New Deal in contemporary America. So I'm going to focus on two aspects of FDR's tenure in the White House. One is the economic side, and one is the international side. Obviously, the economic side is dealing with recovering from the Depression. So the New Deal and the legislation that accompanied it, and the enormous change to how we as a nation viewed our government in relation to our people. The second part, as FDR's tenure progressed, became an obsession with dealing with World War II. And it became the central focus of his presidency, and also became key to his vision for the future of not only our country, but the entire world. So I want to try to hit on both of those, and then talk about how he viewed those two seemingly separate issues in a unified way. Much of what I'm going to talk about is political. How could it not be? I want to emphasize that you're not going to be confused about what my political leanings are, okay? I'm not going to soft pedal that. I believe what I believe. You may believe something totally different than me. I want to emphasize that we have to be able to listen to each other and talk to each other about political disputes. Right now, our political discourse is as poisonous as I have ever seen it in my lifetime. My understanding is in the past there have been times when it's been equally as poisonous, but in my lifetime I've never seen anything like it. And it's cutting us off at the knees. We have to be able to disagree, find common ground, talk about not just differences of policy agenda, but what our common goals are. And I actually think if we just took a step back from the poisonous political rhetoric and we said, what are our common goals? It's pretty simple. I have a family. I want the world to be better for my children. You have families. You want the world to be better for your children and grandchildren. You are going to have families. You want the world to be better for your children. It's pretty simple. Now, the way we go about doing it, we're going to have disagreements, of course. But we shouldn't be so hamstrung by our inability to even have the discussion. So, having said, I want you to understand that I've got political beliefs. I'm not an expert. I'm not here to tell you what the truth is. I have opinions. If you disagree with them, great. You can tell me about it. Come tell me about it afterwards. Don't be offended by the fact also that I have opinions that may be different than yours. Because I don't claim to have absolute truth on any subject, let alone these. Because political discourse, unlike scientific discourse, is inherently biased. Nobody has political truth. It's different than science. In science, you take two hydrogens and oxygen, you get water. If you understand how planets move and you understand the physics of propulsion, you can send things off this planet, put them on the moon or another planet. That's science. It doesn't matter who you are, where you grew up, it's the same solution. It's the same mathematics, same chemistry. That's different. Politics is a totally different thing. It's governed by biases. It's governed by how we grew up, what our opinions are, what our goals are. And so there is no political truth. Anybody that comes up and tells you they have the political truth for you, they are snake oil salesmen. Don't believe it. And I'm talking not to the people sitting in the front who are my age and older. I'm talking to you in the back. Don't buy it. Think for yourself. Take in what is valuable to you. Take in what resonates with you, but do not believe a political leader who stands in front of you, or somebody like me who stands in front of you, and says, I am going to deliver the political truth to you. Don't buy it. Sticking in this same topic, and this is a long preamble before I even get to talking about the New Deal, but there is a fundamental danger to a free and open society when we cannot have political discourse. It undermines the basic foundations of our democratic governance. And FDR was very well attuned to this. At the time he assumed office, there were a lot of people in this country who were ready to give up on democratic governance. They were either looking at fascist governments that had were rising around the globe, especially in Europe and Germany and Spain, and saying that would be a much more efficient way to run things. Or they were looking from the left, looking at a totalitarian communist regime in Russia and thinking, boy, that makes sense. FDR refused to allow the United States to fall into those, what he saw as ultimately hopeless approaches to dealing with problems. And in fact, he was right, because both of those systems ultimately failed. What system prevailed? Our system. Why did our system prevail? Because it's not just based on economics, it's based on the free and open society. We must maintain that, and political discourse is the key, is the foundation stone to that. And one crucial component is what you're doing. You are getting yourself educated. Be proud of yourself for doing that. Don't stop. Keep it going. So what is the central legacy of the New Deal? If I had to sum it up in a sentence, it would be the belief that our government could and should be used as a tool for solving problems and helping to make the lives of all Americans better. Pretty simple. It was not, however, a belief that government is the only solution to all problems, or that all the solutions were necessarily going to be perfect. In fact, one of my favorite FDR comments comes from a fireside chat when he's talking about the various programs that he's trying to get through and implement. And he says, he uses a baseball analogy, and he says, I don't expect to bat 1,000. What he meant is every idea I have is not going to be perfect. I'm going to have ideas that maybe don't work. I'm going to have ideas that might partially work, but we need to revisit them. It's an ongoing process. He felt that as president, he needed to put forth ideas for solving problems, not just pretend the problems don't exist. And that if he failed to accomplish a task, and failure is, after all, a common occurrence in everything. Everything in life, you're going to encounter failure. But what do you do with that? You frankly acknowledge the fact, and you move forward with a newer and better informed idea. It's not that complicated. And FDR embraced that. He confronted problems and said, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and figure it out. And if we make mistakes, we're going to move on and do something different. But we're always pushing forward, examining and looking for a solution to this problem we see in front of us. So what are some of the core problems that he faced? Well, of course, when he started, he talked about having the 3 R's. He wanted to have relief for the unemployed and poor. 25% of the nation was out of work. Poverty, depending on how you measure it, could have been 60 to 70% of the American population was living in what would have at that time been defined as poverty. So that's the first R, relief. The second is recovery of the economy. The economy had collapsed. So all of his legislation was focused on helping with relief, helping with recovery, and then he also wanted to reform the financial system so that the underlying structural elements that led to the Great Depression could not happen again. So what did he do? I'm going to list off a bunch of different things he did. Eyes glaze over, I totally get it. But so he signed the Emergency Banking Act. That was one of the first things he did. That authorized the Federal Reserve to ensure deposits and restore confidence in the banking system. That was crucial to getting the basic economy going. He also then in 1933 passed the Banking Act, which made all those sort of reforms under the Federal Reserve a permanent part of our legal code. He also established the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which still exists today. I'm not sure exactly the number, but I believe if you have under $100,000 in a bank, if that bank goes under, you don't lose your money. It seems like a just common sense approach. That was not the case in 1932, which led to the bank runs and a ton of problems. So simple solution to a problem. You spread out through an insurance policy, essentially, a federally funded insurance policy, spread out the risk across all the banks, and therefore individuals don't lose everything they've saved by doing what you should do is have your money in a bank instead of stuffed in the mattress in your house. He also, some other laws, he had the National Recovery Administration, which allowed industries to create codes of fair competition. So addressing things like monopoly competition and things that undermined the free market. He established the Securities and Exchange Commission, which still exists, which is a crucial commission for making sure that these stock transactions are above board, that nobody's manipulating the market, that nobody is finding ways to manipulate our ability to trade freely stocks and bonds in the open marketplace. And that is a crucial protection for investors from abusive stock practices. Many Americans have 401ks. That 401k is protected by the work of the SEC. He also was very concerned about agricultural policy. The country, of course, at the time had a much bigger portion of our overall GDP was based on agriculture, and it was crucial to stabilize prices, change farming practices so that farmers were using the best possible science to guide their decisions about putting in crops and their crop rotations. And the Agricultural Adjustment Administration was enormously successful at stabilizing and increasing rural incomes. He also was very concerned about public works in general. So the Civilian Conservation Corps, you see evidence of their work throughout the South, throughout the country. You go into a park, you'll find some building that was built by the CCC. Here, right outside of Warm Springs, you go and you'll see an absolutely lovely building built by the CCC. It was a part of putting people to work, but it was also an investment in our communities. It was an investment in our natural resources, the great natural wonder of our country. The CCC was crucial in helping to preserve that. He also had the Tennessee Valley Authority, which promoted electricity generation and other forms of economic development on the Tennessee River Basin. So those are some of the sort of key things that he put forth right away to try to deal with the problems right away. As his administration went on, the economy wasn't bouncing back quickly enough, and he felt there was still more that needed to be done. So he, in 1935, looked to a sort of second New Deal. What would be the component of that? And so he put in the Works Progress Administration, which supervised construction of bridges, libraries, parks, other facilities. Again, investments in our public life. And you see evidence of that today. You go walking around, you will run it, you go to a library. There's a library, in fact, in Hyde Park that is built by workers who were in the WPA. Still standing, still functioning, still a part of the community where it exists. And that's true across the country. He also established the National Labor Relations Act, which guaranteed employees the right to organize trade unions. Obviously, that's controversial, even today. But the ability to organize for workers is a crucial tool for them. And those who seek to undermine unions are undermining the ability of workers to have a fair workplace and a fair wage for what they do. So the NLRA was designed to help support workers in their create a legal structure for them to organize and seek better wages, seek better working conditions. And of course, arguably the biggest program that he put forth is Social Security. It has formed the backbone of the American safety net. It has been incredibly resilient. Yes, are there funding issues? Yeah, there are. Are the funding issues the fault of Social Security? I'm actually not so sure of that. I actually think the funding issues are really a problem of borrowing against Social Security. But again, we could have a long debate about how to fund, what's the best way to fund Social Security, what's the best way forward with this. But there is no denying, in my view at least, that Social Security has formed a core component of our social safety net. And if you got rid of it today, millions of Americans would be adversely affected. So all of these things I'm mentioning, there's this and more. FDR said, what are problems we face? How do we go about fixing them? But the key for him is he was using the tools that were available to him with the government. That was then controversial. It is today controversial. Many people think the government should do none of these things. I personally disagree, obviously. But it doesn't mean that we can't have a discussion about what's the best way. If government isn't the best way to solve these problems, what is? How are we going to solve the problems? Are we just going to pretend they don't exist? That's not a way to deal with it. So if a government program isn't the way to deal with this particular problem, whatever we're talking about, fine. Then what is? Let's find the best solution that helps the American people the most. That part doesn't seem controversial to me. I get why there are disagreements about the best way to go about it, and I think we should have that discussion. But we can't pretend the problems don't exist, and we can't pretend that government has never been successful at solving them. So one area that is touched on in the film that I wanted to sort of zero in on is rural electrification, because I think it's a great example of FDR coming up with a solution to a problem, making an investment in our communities and in our country, and it paying enormous long-term benefits that you really can't, I don't even think you can. I've looked for some studies that try to assess what's the impact of that, what's the economic impact over the last 80 years. It's almost incalculable, the benefit of rural electrification. So I want to talk about just some of the things that are obvious that having electricity would do for you if you lived in 1940 in South Georgia. So one thing, it increased agricultural productivity. So electricity enabled the use of machinery like milking parlors and refrigerated storage tanks. It boosted dairy and farm production and also reduced losses of spoiled milk or meat or whatever it is. So electricity, you make the investment in electricity, putting it on the farm, and it pays dividends. It also improved just basic living standards. I mean, you had better access to light, heat, appliances. It improved the quality of life in rural homes by making them more valuable when they look to sell the house. So that's a way for people to build wealth. In fact, the majority of American wealth is held in their home. Rural electrification also spurred the growth of local industries, including construction and service sectors. And again, long-term economic benefits. A kind of simple thing, it reduced the need for people to burn kerosene lamps in their homes, increased their quality of life. They're not breathing toxic fumes. They're not burning down their house. It also freed up family members to pursue other things than just the basic things you needed to do to get by day to day. So having electrical powered appliances like washing machines, I mean, it saved hours of housework. Imagine going back to a time when you had no electricity in your house. How much more time you would spend cleaning, getting food. You can't refrigerate anything. I mean, it's obvious, but a small investment had enormous impact on people's lives. It also narrowed the urban-rural divide because electricity was widely available in urban areas. But by expanding it to rural areas, it leveled the playing field. And why, so I asked myself, so rural electrification, it took government action to make it work. Why is it that the private marketplace didn't address that need? The standard idea would be that private markets always address needs. Well, obviously they didn't in this case, and obviously it was an investment worth making. Obviously private industry was not prepared to make that investment, so the government did, and it paid dividends. It was not just throwing money down the drain in any stretch of the imagination. So when we hear today about all this rampant government waste, sure, I'm not going to be shocked. I know private corporations where there's waste. But does that mean that all public investment in our country is wasteful spending? No, it doesn't. The one does not follow from the other. And rural electrification is a great example of public investment that paid for itself. Not all public investment needs to pay for itself. Sometimes you make public investment because it just makes people's lives better. It's part of the moral code of us being Americans together, in this together. But when it does pay off, like rural electrification, Why not? Why not let the government be a part of that? So, just to sum up on the economic side, what did the New Deal do? It allowed the nation to come through its greatest depression without undermining the underlying capitalist system. As I said a moment ago, there were alternatives out there that people advocated for. One is a leftist communist revolution, one was a rightist fascist revolution. We didn't go that route. Many hundreds of millions of our fellow citizens on this planet did go that route. It did not work out for them. Our system proved better. But it proved better not simply because we were a capitalist free market country. It proved better because we found that sweet spot. I think it is the sweet spot between government participation in our economy for the benefit of the people while maintaining free markets. I'm in the financial industry. I'm not looking to see the free markets totally destroyed. But I'm also not willing to say that the government is unable to solve problems because they've been solving problems ever since the New Deal started. It has worked. So FDR, essentially, he permanently established the principle that the national government should take action to rehabilitate and preserve America's human resources. And then New Deal liberalism, it laid the foundation for a new consensus. There's a saying that came, I believe, during the Eisenhower administration, and it tried to capture the Republicans' take on the New Deal, because really, up until just recently, Republican administrations embraced the underlying fabric of the New Deal just like Democrats did. They didn't maybe look to expand it quite as much, but they still embraced the underlying premises. And what the saying is that the Republicans say that the New Deal was a great idea and we should never let it happen again. But what that captures is that the basic underlying premise was not refuted. When General Eisenhower became President Eisenhower, he did not seek immediately to undo everything the New Deal had done. In fact, he talked very famously about how anybody looking to take away Social Security was not going to be in office very long and was probably not very smart. So this consensus that developed because of the New Deal, it crossed administrations. Yes, there were varying degrees of enthusiasm about it. There were varying degrees of wanting to expand it. Generally, large expansions happened under Democrats. So we had Truman's Fair Deal, and we had LBJ's Great Society. But that does not mean that there was not some underlying consensus about the fundamental principles laid out in the New Deal. And it crossed administrations. It crossed party lines. We had a governing consensus for nearly a century. That's a remarkable accomplishment. Something that the people that came before us politically should be proud of, because it also made us the most prosperous nation on the earth by a long shot. It's not even close. And it allowed us to win something that I want to talk about next, which allowed us to win the Cold War. I was in the State Department. I was sent to Vienna. I spent most of my time in Prague, immediately on the fall of communism. So I got to watch Czechoslovakia, or at the time Czechoslovakia, now just the Czech Republic, Poland, Hungary, the former Soviet states like Belarus and Ukraine. I got to be kind of a firsthand witness to these countries emerging from communism. I did some traveling, talked to a lot of people, and one of the things that happened again and again in my conversations with people, was that we won the Cold War not because we had more refrigerators. I mean, sure, that helped. They were interested in the consumer goods we had. We did not win the Cold War because we had an enormous military that was lethal. Sure, that helped. It might have deterred Soviet aggression. That might have been oversold to us. I don't know for sure. But we won the Cold War because of our ideas. When I talked to people, they wanted to talk about books and art and movies. They wanted to talk about our free and open society. They weren't intimidated by our military. They maybe wanted some blue jeans, but that's not what drove it. It was our free and open society. And so having watched us win the Cold War, my feeling is that the foundation that FDR laid, it worked. He didn't live long enough to see it work, but he and Winston Churchill laid down the foundation. So I'm going to quickly talk about what that is. So there were sort of 4 core principles that FDR and Churchill talked about as how they wanted to emerge out of the Second World War. One was a belief in the preservation of the balance of world power. Essentially what that means is we won the war, we are going to be the global leaders. That's pretty straightforward, pretty uncontroversial in my view. But he did not, at the same time, think that by winning the war, we needed to go in and further decimate the Germans and further decimate the Japanese. He felt that we needed to help them rebuild in our image. And that's exactly what happened. And who are 2 of our staunchest allies and biggest trading partners? Japan and Germany. Who are 2 focal points of maintaining open democratic societies in the world? Japan and Germany, the 2 countries we defeated in World War II. Why are they that way? Because we didn't seek retribution. Because of FDR and Winston Churchill, they recognized the mistakes of World War I when Germany was forced to pay exorbitant reparations, and it led to the fascist takeover. They didn't want to make that mistake again. So, though we were going to preserve the balance of world power, we were going to be the dominant world power. That's how we emerged from World War II. FDR wanted to keep that. We were nevertheless going to recognize we had world partners to build. In light of that, he also focused on wanting to have concerted international action to keep the peace, and that includes the United Nations. It was key to him. It was going to replace the League of Nations set up under Woodrow Wilson, but the United Nations was a core principle of FDR's idea of how to govern the planet in the wake of World War II so that we could avoid ever again having to revisit that conflict. He also felt that peace and political collaboration rested on commercial harmony among nations and therefore required a freely trading world. The free trade regimes set up because of that insight have preserved peace in the West and in Asia for nearly a century. We are, right now, as we stand here, that is being undone. You need to ask yourself, do we really want to undo that? Is that really the best solution to bringing home industry lost to lower cost labor in other places? Or is it likely leading to the exact same catastrophe that led to World War II? It's something that we should be discussing, but we're not. But there are major, major changes afoot to FDR's vision of the future. But I don't see a discussion about it. And it's too bad because this is crucial. This is not a joke. This is not something that we get to make a little mistake here and then everything will be fine. No, we're undoing core aspects of the world that was built in the New Deal. When FDR, when he was doing his post-war planning, he was constrained by the fact that he had a partner in Joseph Stalin, an ally, to defeat Germany, who he's been criticized for being naive about Joseph Stalin. I don't believe it for a second. But there was some reality on the ground. The Russians had lost 20 million fighting men and women, and they occupied Eastern Europe with their army. So what are you going to do? Are you going to then just continue World War II and cross the borders? I've read that Winston Churchill floated that idea to FDR. But the country had gone through so much, the world had gone through so much, not at all clear that A, that would be successful, and B, that that was the best approach. So he made compromises with Stalin in his post-war planning, but nevertheless, he stuck to these core principles. And they didn't end up being the governing principles for the Eastern Bloc, but they did become the governing principles for us and our allies in Western Europe and Southeast Asia. And I think he was right. It seems clear to me he was right. There's a lot of doubt about that now, but I frankly do not understand what the doubt is. What's it based on? Because the peace and prosperity that has reigned seems irrefutable. So the post-war coalition that FDR and Churchill built, it did, in fact, win the Cold War without nuclear weapons flying. There were regional conflicts, things, we were involved in things we shouldn't have done. For sure, the Soviets were involved in things they shouldn't have done. We sort of fought out proxy wars for people who didn't deserve what befell them. But we also did not annihilate the Northern Hemisphere with nuclear weapons, which could have happened. So the coalition that FDR built, that included Western Europe, that included Japan, that included South Korea, it helped us win the Cold War. It helped us emerge not just from World War II, but emerge victorious in the Cold War. And that coalition is also being undone right now. We can have an honest disagreement about the nature of that coalition, the best way forward. But we're not having a discussion about that. We're not having a discussion about the implications of undoing that coalition. We're just going our own way. And I don't think people realize the implications of that and the danger in that. Now again, maybe there is a pathway that I'm not seeing. I'm not clairvoyant. I don't have all the answers. But I sure would love to have some kind of discussion about, do we really want to undo the coalition that got us out of World War II, emerged out of World War II, and won the Cold War? I want to try to unify all this by talking about FDR's final State of the Union address. It was the last time he got to speak to the nation. He would die, he delivered it in January of 1944. He would be dead in April of 1944. He was clearly in failing health. He clearly worried about the future of his legacy. And he wanted to articulate what he felt are the core principles that we as a nation needed to embrace in order to move forward. So, I also feel this speech, FDR was not an especially systematic thinker. He wasn't an ideologue. There were a lot of people who had theories about everything. He really didn't care about all that. He really was, in fact, side note, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, famous Supreme Court justice, once described FDR as having a second-rate intellect, but a first-rate personality. And I think that does capture something about FDR, and I think he would have been enormously amused to hear that. But so he wasn't an ideologue, he wasn't programmatic in his thinking. He really was a guy who said, here's a problem, let's solve it. But this speech that he gave, his State of the Union speech, I think sort of captures the essence of what FDR, what his vision was. And so I want to just quickly conclude by by bringing this up. So the speech begins with FDR talking about the progress of the war. And as he did so, because it's January of 1944, so we're in the tail end of World War II. He knows we're going to win. Churchill knows we're going to win. It's a matter of time and a matter of a number of decisions about how best to go about winning. But the war was won. We were not losing that war. So he wanted to remind his listeners of the great sacrifices of the nation. And in his words, he felt that these sacrifices, quote, impose upon us all a sacred obligation to see to it that out of this war, we and our children will gain something better than mere survival. He went on to say, we are united in determination that this war shall not be followed by another interim which leads to new disaster, that we shall not repeat the tragic errors of ostrich isolationism. What he meant by that was, by being isolationist, you're burying your head in the sand like an ostrich. The world still impacts you. Pretending that it doesn't, pretending that you aren't a part of the world community is not a solution to the problem. So burying our heads in the sands, being isolationist, it doesn't mean the problems go away. It just means that we are unprepared to deal with them. So it's important to remember that FDR struggled to bring the people of the United States to the realization that the war in Europe against fascism was, whether we liked it or not, our war as well. Here in the US, groups like the America First community actively resisted FDR's efforts to support the British in their stand against Nazi Germany. And they remained staunchly opposed to our entry into the war right up until the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. In fact, I have my doubts that FDR would have been able to convince the American people to fight that war in Europe had the Japanese not attacked us. Once Pearl Harbor happened, though, there was no turning back. And so in some ways, we might be fortunate that the Japanese attacked us, because otherwise we might have been forced to find some accommodation with fascism in Europe, and who knows where that would have led. So, but FDR, along with Winston Churchill, they were both well aware of the perils of isolationism in an increasingly interconnected world. In 1760, that's different. The world is different. It was still connected in ways, but it's not the same as in 1940. So isolationism, he felt, and I agree, it's not a solution to a problem. It's pretending the problem doesn't exist and pretending the problem doesn't affect you, which it does. Today, now more than ever. Isolationism is not going to solve whatever problems we have on the world stage. But we're headed that way, and we're not having a discussion about it. So in this State of the Union address, he wanted to remind the nation that once we achieved a full and final victory, we should not turn our backs on our international partners and resume our isolationist posture, lest we end up courting disaster all over again. He then went on to link the war effort and the securing of the peace to a broader social effort to create security for all. As he put it, the one supreme objective for the future can be summed up in one word: security. And that means not only physical security, which provides safety from attacks by aggressors, it means also economic security, social security, moral security. Freedom from fear is eternally linked with freedom from want. That captures the essence of FDR's vision of our country and our way forward. Freedom from fear is eternally linked with freedom from want. What's he trying to say there? He's saying if you're hungry, you aren't free. If you have no access to medical care or education, you aren't free. Free speech is wonderful. It's a core principle that we should all sustain, support, and appreciate, because I've seen societies that didn't have it. But it loses some of its meaning if you're hungry. It loses some of its meaning if your family, somebody in your family is ill and you can't do anything about it. Or trying to do something about it would erase all of your family savings. Freedom is tied to this underlying economic base that FDR felt that we needed to provide and secure. So, he was trying to combine our national commitment to winning the war with a national commitment to extending and expanding the New Deal. He wanted an entirely new conception of what it means to live in freedom, an entirely new conception of what it means to live in peace. As he put it, this republic had its beginning and grew to its present strength under the protection of certain inalienable political rights. Among them, of course, we all know, the right of free speech, free press, free worship, trial by jury, and freedom from unreasonable searches and seizures. These were our rights to life and liberty. But he went on. As our nation has grown in size and stature, however, as our industrial economy has expanded, these political rights proved inadequate to assure us equality in the pursuit of happiness. We have come to a clear realization of the fact that true individual freedom cannot exist without economic security and independence. Necessitous men are not free men. People who are hungry and out of a job are the stuff of which dictatorships are made. That's the core of FDR's vision. That in order to be free, we absolutely must have economic security. He's getting at a crucial point there, drawing the connection between economic rights, democratic rights, and national security. Because it was clear to him that without economic security, a citizen's ability to exercise his or her democratic rights is seriously compromised. In other words, democracy itself is endangered when people lack economic rights. And when democracy is endangered, peace and security are imperiled as well. I want to thank you so much for listening to me rant. And I want to urge the young people in this audience, don't settle for what we're giving you. Don't settle. This politics is not normal. Don't assume it's normal. Don't give up. I know it's hard. It's hard. But do not give up on the dream of a free and fair society. Unfortunately, I wish my generation were leaving you something better. I've got college-age kids too. I wish we had done a better job of handing you something that was in great shape, but we're not handing you something in great shape. You're going to have to rebuild anew. And understanding the history that led to this point is going to be one of the tools in your chest to rebuild anew. But don't give up. Please don't give up. It's worth fighting for. It really is. And as I get old, I'm going to have to rely on watching you do it.